Then she's going to be even more upright again, be able to get even lower again with more forward knee travel. Even though the load is less, we can actually get probably a bit more quad loading here because of that. Back to Elite FTS compound, I'm Tom Shepard. So we talked about body proportions in the previous video. Now we've got Amber here. We're going to specifically look at some exercise variations and weak point work that we can do for her based on her long limbs that we worked out earlier, okay? So just to remind you of what a back squat looks like for Amber with her long femur and her short torso, we're just gonna have her demonstrate for a couple of reps now. And remember, what we're looking for is the hip angle and the joint angles that we get at the bottom of the squat, which are gonna be way more bent over than we see with someone like Naomi from the previous video with short legs, okay? So Amber, if you don't mind, just go a couple of back squats for us with a little bit of a pause at the bottom. So what we're going to see here, remember, because of the long femur, is we're going to see a lot of hip flexion, and her torso angle relative to the floor is going to look not that dissimilar to a lot of people's start angle at the start of a deadlift, for example. So her back squat is very posterior chain dominant, and that means that in the back squat for her, it's going to be her quads that are generally the weak point because they don't get worked directly very well. So what often is going to happen here when you get your long leg lifter is we're going to see that kind of squat good morning pattern. So Amber, if you just come up to the top, can you do a squat good morning for me? So basically let your hips shoot up out of the bottom. Okay, so she's going to go down. So because the quads are weak, she's subconsciously going to shift the weight off the quads by the hips shooting up. So drive just the hip up on its own. Okay, so this will go down, just drive the hip up there, and then the hips come through later on, okay? And all that is the body shifting the weight onto the posterior chain. You can rack it. That's the body shifting the weight onto the posterior chain away from the quads because the quads aren't strong enough to take the load out of the hole in the squat. So the hips shoot up and it basically turns into a good morning out the bottom. So what we need to do to eliminate that is get some more direct quad work. So for Amber, working on the back squat is going to require her to do squat variations that are more front loaded. Okay, so the back squat is a great posterior chain exercise for her, but it's not going to tick that box. So the first option that we're going to look at is just a basic front squat. And all I want you to look at is the difference that we see when she loads the bar in the front of the body and the difference in her torso angle and the joint angles at the bottom of the squat. So if you don't mind just doing a couple of front squats for me, but with a pause at the bottom. So what we're going to see now that the bar is on the front, she's not going to need to flex the hip as much to keep the bar over her center of mass. So when she gets to the bottom, she's going to have more forward knee travel and less hip flexion than she did on the back squat. Okay, so just take your time, drive the knees forward, and there we go. So we get a bit more of an upright posture here. That's it, come up, just do a couple with a 1 or 2 second pause as well. So it's still a bit more bent over than we might see a back squat from some shorter legged people. But what we're also going to see here, due to the front-sided loading and less hip flexion, her depth is actually going to be better here than it is on a back squat. People with long femurs are going to really struggle to hit depth a lot of the time because of the amount of hip flexion. Because the more you flex the hip, the harder it is to get below the knee. So here, putting the bar on the front of the body, go ahead and put that in. It's going to allow her to get not only lower into the squat, which actually can be great for a long-legged lifter for building confidence and going low in that back squat pattern, but because of the more forward knee travel, we're also going to get way more quad loading. Okay. Now, not everyone is comfortable with getting into a front squat position. Now, you could be using straps or you could use some kind of front squat harness. Now, if you want to kind of regress it a little bit and use a variation that just about anyone can do regardless of mobility but with less load, we could have her do a Frankenstein squat. So that's going to be a front squat with her arms out in front. And what this does is actually load the bar even further forward on the body because the arms are out and the shoulders are forward. So then she's going to be even more upright again and even be able to get even lower again with more forward knee travel. So even though the load is less, we can actually get probably a bit more quad loading here because of that. So if we just, Amber, if you don't mind demonstrating for us. So the arms are going to go out in front and she's going to have the bar pitch just behind the cap of her front delt. And then what she's going to do is keep the elbow and the hand as high as she can and keep the chin tucked down so her throat doesn't push out into the bar, because then you can choke yourself out. So if you don't mind, do a couple for us, pause down at the bottom. So what we're looking for here is to make sure the elbow stays higher than the shoulder at all times. Second these drop, the bar is going to roll forward and we'll lose it. So what she's going to do now is she'll drop down to the bottom, And what we're going to see is that because the bar is slightly further forward on her body than before, she can get slightly lower and slightly more upright again. So just one or two more. Way more forward knee travel than we were getting on the back squat now. And because of that, way more quad loading. Just one more if you don't mind. Okay. Beautiful. Thank you, Anin. So the other benefit that we're going to get out of the Frankenstein squat is, as we said about seeing that kind of squat good morning pattern in long-legged lifters, you can get away with that on like a front squat or even a Zercher squat. So you can end up turning a front squat almost into a posterior chain exercise anyway. It starts getting real ugly. They'll come out of the bottom and the hips will still shoot up, but because the arms are holding the bar here, or for example if it's a Zercher squat in here, they can get away with pitching the hips back and salvaging it. Whereas when you do a Frankenstein squat, because the bar is only resting here and you have nothing to artificially pull the bar back in, it completely eliminates that squat good morning pattern, because otherwise you just lose the bar. These things don't always have to be complicated or big changes just to tweak these things to get a bit more quad loading in your squatting.